Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I'm going to give just a little bit of time. If you'd like, you can share where you're joining from in the chat. But I know everyone's pretty busy, so I want to get right into things. I'm Chloe. I'm a marketing associate at August Schools, and I'm really excited about the webinar we have today. So let's see. We are lucky to have both health services directors and nurses from independent and public schools with us today. We have current August users as well as people that are just getting to know us. So if you're just getting to know us, August is a health management platform that's built specifically for schools. It's designed to help school nurses document, manage, and communicate student health information. So it's an intuitive and compliant program that's built around how school health offices actually work. And today we're actually hearing from a member of our own community. So Joy Irvin is with us today. She's a school nurse and an August user at Lakeside School in Seattle. And Joy just recently completed the National Certification Examination for school nurses, and she's here to share how that experience has shown up in her day-to-day practice and her documentation in August. So Joy, we're really happy to have you. Go ahead and take it away.
Awesome. Hi, everybody. My name's Joy. Thank you so much for coming today. I'm really excited to share with you about how I've been using August and how studying for my certification exam really is helping influence specifically how I chart and really how I incorporate the nursing process into my work. My background, I started as a neonatal ICU nurse and worked there for about 6 years. And I've been a school nurse for about 3 years now. In either position, it's always very humbling to enter a new specialty. And I think that taking the examination for school nursing really just solidified why I feel so passionate about school nursing. And so I'm just happy to share with you some of those aspects today and talk to you a little bit more about the examination. So let me start the presentation. Chloe, how do I get the slides? Thank you. Perfect. So I just talked to you a little bit about my background. When I started, my school was using a different electronic health record system, and I was quickly in the market for something that I felt would meet our needs a little bit better, and that's why I found August. In really the last year and a half of working with August, I feel like I have been able to personalize this platform so much, and it makes me really excited for all the ways that I can kind of take my thinking, put it in the platform, and make charting day to day even easier. So when I talk about the nationally certified school nurse, that was what the exam I took was. And a lot of the preparation I did in the time of studying really just opened my eyes to some things that I didn't even consider. I think it also made me realize that it also makes you focus on all of these different patient populations that may be different than the ones that I serve. Right now, I work at a 5 through 12 school, and so I work with middle schoolers and high schoolers, and that also changes my approach and how I'm thinking about them and what kind of developmental care they need. And so studying really helped me think about all of the things that I could change in my practice at my independent school, but then also things that I didn't even realize I knew. So the three components that I recognized most when studying is when they're looking for a nurse who is certified in the specialty, is that they can recognize what is normal, what's progressing, and what's concerning or referable. Is the big thing is like in community health, we are the first people to see these students and be able to refer them out. We're also the people that get to provide the education when things are completely normal and developmentally appropriate, and we get to be able to share that information with students or with their parents or guardians. You also get to see kind of like red flags. Where am I getting a little bit more concerned, and where do I want to potentially refer out, or where do I want to say, hey, it would be good to go see a healthcare provider, or wait this out for a few days. I think you really get to be that backboard for families of kind of like in some cases, their intro to the medical world for our families that are not interacting with their healthcare provider daily, or their child doesn't have a chronic condition. So when I was studying, a lot of what the study focuses on is like chronic conditions. And so when I look at all of these different chronic conditions or common ailments that a school nurse will assess, I realized in so many ways, these things that we're assessing are very simple. A headache is really just a headache. Like it could just be like from dehydration or something, but also how is my charting reflecting that I assessed any red flag symptoms and I am able to be prompted to check those red flag symptoms. And then also, how am I recording everything? Really, I wanted my decision making to be more evident in my charting. And this is really where I started making some personal changes in August. And I'm excited to share them with you today. I'm hopeful that it can help you as well. So, really, this has helped me sharpen how I approach even a simple visit. It helps me feel a little bit more like a nurse, and just make sure I'm getting each of those clinical components. And it also makes me feel that my charting is consistently robust. So when I'm talking about what my charting is, like I said, every visit is still a clinical decision. So even when we're thinking about the most simple thing, and how can I tell you this is a stomach ache and not appendicitis, I'll walk through some of those things. And in saying this too, I'm also not trying to disaster plan. I think that in history, when I was a NICU nurse, a lot of what we do is a full body assessment. We chart by exception. And I think school nursing inherently is very different. It's not necessary to do a full body assessment for every single symptom that comes to us. And we also don't really have, at least like at my school, we don't have a policy for what chart by exception looks like. And ultimately, in my charting, I want to make sure that I'm able to defend that charting, that I'm able to understand it, and even better, if I can have someone else on my team understand it too. Whether that's another nurse or an athletic trainer, I want that to be a helpful tool where they can go into a student's chart and really understand, okay, what was the clinical picture that day? Why was the decision made? And be able to move forward from there. So I think one big thing as nurses, it's like I said, when we're the front line of community health, is playing a huge role in identification and intervention. And some of those things can be really basic interventions, but how do I differentiate a symptom from something that could be like a chronic condition, or something that's even more serious? So we'll go into that a little bit. So when I'm looking at my documentation, if I'm confident something's simple, did I document what I ruled out? When I'm looking, if I'm really just not concerned, I'm like, this is a typical stomach ache. Can I show why? Can I show that my patient was still very well appearing, and they weren't doing anything concerning? What does my charting say to reflect? Like, no, they were standing, they were talking to me, they were alert and oriented, all of these things. Ultimately, I'm also trying to find a balance of being excessive with my charting, to also, when we're not doing charting by exception, I don't want to just chart everything under the sun and inherently waste my time, but I want to be really diligent to make sure, do I have enough information? I think another big gap that I have noticed is like, when I intervene, did it help? I think that in studying for the exam, a big portion of the nursing process is also going to be reassessment of your interventions. In some cases, we don't get the opportunity to reassess our students if we're sending them home, or if they're not staying in our office. But I also want to be sure, if I am like providing a pain medication, for example, is it helping? If I am providing an ice pack and they've stayed to rest for 15 minutes, do they feel improved? Do they feel the same? So I just want to make sure that while all of these things are going on in my brain, I want to make sure that at least what I'm putting in my chart reflects I am going through this process. And so, like I said, this was really where my gap was. I think that ultimately we can talk to our students and we can ask all of these questions. We can kind of have this routine flow that we are practicing. When a student comes in and you're like, well, I always ask these 5 questions. And I want to make sure that my clinical judgment is showing in my charting. And so in real time, while I'm considering, oh, is it this or is it this, where I'm trying to ask more questions of like, have you drank water today or have you eaten food? I also want to be just make it even easier to chart that note. So in that, I'm looking especially to how can I defend my charting? If I'm in court, I need to defend my actions. How can I be sure I walk through all the possible scenarios? And this is really where I changed my charting. And August has been a huge help in doing that and just making the process even easier. So before, I had a lot of charting that's pretty minimal and doesn't show clinical thinking. I think also in the grand scheme of things, I am talking about different conditions where it's like, yes, a kid has a headache and or a kid has a stomach ache or they have a cold or flu or they're feeling any of these things and it's our very standard things. I think when it's more complex, obviously your charting is going to look very different and also can't necessarily follow a template. But especially for these simple conditions, I want to make sure when this is a huge amount of what I see, how can I be assured in my charting that everything looks great? And so let's say I'm charting a quick note for a kid who has a headache. They have a headache. I gave them some water. Maybe they rested for a little bit. They returned to class. I'm not asking enough questions, or I'm at least not documenting enough of the questions that I asked about their headache. And so, are they having any other symptoms? Like, could this be something that is related to a greater picture? When did it start? Like, was there a trigger to this? Like, did it start after PE, or did it start in the lunchroom, or has it happened since last night and they haven't gotten rid of it for a few days? So, I think that's important. I'm assessing for different vital signs. I think fever could be one of them, especially if the headache is preceding an illness. Are they alert and do I have any neuro concerns? Most of the time, the answer is yes, they are alert and oriented and they don't have any neuro concerns. But most of the time, I can see that with my eyes. My chart needs to reflect that. I also want to be really diligent about the interventions I'm providing my students and whether they declined that intervention. I want to be really clear in my charting that I am providing all of these different aspects to my student and that they get to decide what they want to do. And so I want to be clear when I've given them options and they choose their options. I want to make sure the ones that they don't want are very clear and also charted. And then the last part we were talking about, reassessed and improved. When I'm going back to the basics, we're going to add pi, and I'm thinking that the nursing process equals best practice. This is really what I've been studying for, and also this is something that we did way back when we got our RN licenses. Where I'm just going to dive a little bit deeper into the assessment, diagnosis, plan, implementation, and evaluation. So I think that it's very easy to incorporate best practice in our conversations with students. And I think the big thing too is I want my charting to be consistent, complete, and defensible. I think also there are things where, maybe I'll chart this one aspect that a student reported, but not chart it the next time. Really, I want to just say, how am I being consistent with all of my students? So going a little bit deeper into assessment. For assessment, I want to make sure my charting reflects things like onset and severity. And really for us to be able to identify like, hey, especially if this is something that's recurring, how can I go back in my notes and see a trend and actually make it useful? Any associated symptoms are also really helpful, kind of helps in building our differential nursing diagnoses. Food, sleep, and stress, especially with my high schoolers, I think those are going to be the biggest components of their health. Of have you eaten today, or what did you eat today? Especially at being able to pose that if they want to disclose it, if they don't want to disclose it, but being able to say like, hey, maybe actually what you need is basic nourishment. Asking about their sleep. And even just like sleep trends over the last week, or asking kind of situationally what's happening. I think this is things that we already very much do in our nursing practice. And like I said, the whole point is I'm trying to get this to an easier process of documenting it. And I also want to highlight what they've tried. I need to be better in my charting about what happened before they got to me. Have they taken ibuprofen already? Okay, great, because I don't want to give ibuprofen. But also, like, they were like, I did try taking a nap, or I did this, or I didn't. I want to be really clear. Hey, I'm not pursuing this part of my assessment or intervention because it's something that's already happened and did work, didn't work. Like, how can I expand on that? And then I'll show you a little bit more in the templates about vitals and a focused exam, and really just how to be expanding your quick note in that too. The next part, diagnosis. What do I think is going on? The big thing is we have our nursing diagnosis, and I think studying made me realize like, okay, there are so many more alarming things that are happening that I clearly rule out for so many reasons, but I want to make sure my charting is like, no, I assessed that. So what do I think is going on? What's influencing my decision? What did I consider or rule out? And so I use them to really catch my red flags. I have a built-in reminder, and really that's saying that's prompting me to be like, okay, I did assess for this. I did assess for this, especially if my consistency of questioning looks a little different for each student. But I'm not concerned for something that's, beyond what's happening right now. So my diagnosis, I'm thinking just a little bit I'm just trying to make my thinking visible. I'm trying to make sure that they know I'm not worried. Here's why. I'm going to skip the next parts of the process, the plan and implement. I think that August does a really easy process in that with the chief complaint section and with the intervention section, just with being able to choose from your drop down menu. So I'm not going to go as much in depth to that today, but I am always happy to talk about those features as well. But then I am going to jump to the evaluation. I think this is another part that I think was naturally getting missed quite often in my charting. So we talked about what does it look like to close the loop. Did I reassess? Have things improved? Have they changed? Have they worsened? And then I think the other part of evaluation too is if you're sending this student off, where is also the boundary of when you say, hey, come back to me, hey, this is alarming, or where the threshold for concern does change, whether that's, hey, come back to me, the school nurse, or if you're seeing them towards the end of the day and you're going to provide either the student or their parent guardian guidance of, if it starts to present like XYZ, this is when you escalate care. I think there's only so much we can do within the hours of the school day, but also part of my evaluation and my reassessment is going to be saying, what do you do next, especially if this doesn't resolve? So this is really where I started using August templates to do these three components: guide my assessment, show my clinical thinking, and closing the loop. Part of showing my clinical thinking too is also assessing red flags. So down here, I think my face is covering it, but how to add default values. August has an incredible help article about how to add default values. And really, once you start doing the first one, you will start speeding up after that. So it's fun to power through and just make a bunch. So the help article is going to assess how to make different templates and values. It's going to be under this encounters tab on the left-hand side of your page, and we're going to click templates. And I just wanted to walk you through it quickly too, so you just see how easy it is. Right now, this step 2 is going to say, the step 2 is going to be like, how do you create one from scratch? I think the other tip that I learned from Victoria was, instead of creating a template from scratch every time, how do you make a copy of the most clinically similar template and then start editing from there? I think that really helps in making sure you're like not starting from scratch every time. The help article will walk you through what it looks like to start from brand new, and that's still a skill that I'm improving on. And really, sorry, I want to say something actually helpful. But uh, really, I think that it just depends on the kind of note that you're looking for. I will also say that the August team is really helpful too. If you are like, here's what I want to do, I can't quite figure out how to do it, I've walked through the help article. The August team is going to be really helpful at saying, like, oh, here's how we could actually pursue that idea. So they're a great resource. So, help article, that'll be linked. And this is where I'm going to start going into what some of my templates look like. So these are going to be just in my table form, but I've built these into my template. So really what I'm trying to do is, essentially, when I have a chief complaint, I almost have a fill in the blank style template to kind of help guide my clinical thinking, directly influence what my assessment, my diagnosis, and my reevaluation are going to look like, and then also to prevent me from having to write down the same things every single time. So really, some of it too is about speed, where you're like, listen, it was just a headache, they had water, and things are totally fine. I want my note to reflect all of these things. So I have a couple examples for you. My first one is going to be about a headache. Um, I have different things that are guiding my assessment. So we talked about onset of, like, how long has this been happening? Where did it start? I feel like my main 3 are going to be class, free periods, after lunch. If that's different for you, of like playground, put that there, because now when I'm saying, when did it start, I'm getting an idea from my student. Was it one of these 3 things? Is there something different I need to be writing? Is there a unique trigger that is probably helpful? I think that part is helpful too. I will also say pain scores. I was noticing I was not as consistent about this in my practice, and maybe that was partly just the way I was doing things. But I think also I want to be really consistent about my pain scores being in there. I think also you can choose a pain score that's developmentally appropriate for your students. And so I had chosen the 0 to 10 scale because I think that's probably the most appropriate for my students. I'm also putting a prompt for last meal. Some of this too is if that is volunteered. I don't necessarily want to probe every single time, but I do think it can be very relevant to a headache. Fluid intake, I'm always asking the kids, are you drinking water? Clearly, hydration is a huge portion of having a headache, and in so many ways, a headache could be related to that. And so, it is something happening. So these are my fill in the blanks right here. Then this other part of my template too is where I get to choose one or the other. And it's just a prompt of like, hey, what happened before they came into my office? So they didn't take any medication prior to their visit, or they reported taking something at home and it did help or it didn't help. Really trying to get the bigger picture of what has led to the student, what are they presenting like now, and really just making sure I'm getting all of these different aspects. And then the big thing too, especially when they talk about chief complaint, is there anything else that I need to add in here specifically that the student says? In studying, they would always say the chief complaint should always be written in the student's own words. And so when they say, I'm coming in for this, like, how am I charting that just like almost exactly as they say without already adding my interpretation on it? Then this next part, this nursing diagnosis part, is I want to make my critical thinking visible and I want to catch red flags. So this is where I say they haven't hit their head recently, no head injury or impact. That immediately changes. I am not going to be assessing for a concussion right now. And I think also, like, their headache is not considered a precursor for concussion. They do not have nausea or vomiting or visual changes or history of migraines. For this nausea, vomiting, visual changes, really what I'm trying to assess for is an increased intracranial pressure. Is there something more alarming to their neurologic state? And these would be some of those signs of something being more alarming. And then this history of migraines too. Some of that is so simple where maybe a kid comes in and says they have a headache, but then doesn't say like, oh yeah, I get migraines all the time, I get headaches all the time. I think that part is just really relevant and helpful. This is the boundary too between charting excessively, and this is where, in some ways I miss being able to chart by exception, but also it just like it's not really how it works in the school nurse practice because we're not looking at every single body system. Theoretically, when I'm assessing for a headache, I'm probably assessing mainly neurologic function. And then if they have additional symptoms to that, I start going into respiratory or cardiac or whatever it is that their symptom is affecting. But I do want to say in their neurologic status, they're alert and oriented times 3. They are not in distress. They're coming to me and saying like, I'm not feeling well, but they're not actively crying. Their mental state looks completely normal, and I'm being able to say like, no, they were well appearing. I need my note to say that they were well appearing, even though most of the time we're like, yes, of course they were well appearing. I want my note to say that too. And then also the accepted and declined provided interventions. I ended up having this as something pre-built in my template as well. Like if a student has menstrual cramps and I offer them a heat pack, sometimes the kids will be like, no, I don't want that. I still want it to be clear in my documentation. I am providing something to you, but it's up to the student whether they want that intervention or not. And I just want to make sure it's also really clear, that delineation. Then this last part, this evaluation, this is where I want to close the loop. So this is where I'm saying, did my interventions help? Reports improvement in their pain score. And then that's after the treatment or interventions described. I could delete that completely and then say there was no change in their symptoms after intervention. And that's where I'm probably going to write a little bit more of like, hey, we made a plan to do this, or we did call home. That's where I'm going to be able to put that information. I also want to say what they looked like walking out of my office. They were walking completely normally. And I feel really comfortable about the way that I sent them off. And I'm always providing the instructions. My kids come in and I say, hey, come back if you're not feeling better, or come back if you're feeling worse, or come back if anything changes. We're telling this to our kids all the time. Like, we are always happy to reassess them and provide them what they need. But also I want to make sure my documentation shows I was opening the door for that, to say, hey, if something gets worse, come back to me. And so this is really quite simply what my template will look like for a headache. A lot of it is my fill in the blanks, options to delete something or add something. And this is also really just my free text. The nice part too with the August templates is when you have your clinic quick note, you can, you have the preset tabs of the student's chief complaint, and that's where I would put this headache tab. And then also in the interventions, where I'm commonly doing encourage hydration, I'm doing rest, or I'm doing like a headache cold cap or like an ice cap or something. All of these different interventions that I commonly offer. Sometimes too, it really just depends, but I can also say like clinic administered medication. I think that the best part is I just put all of these different things in my template, and then whatever isn't relevant, I can just go delete really quickly. But it just makes charting so beautifully quick, which I love. So I have a couple other examples for you, and right now I'm choosing just some of these main examples. Today we have headache, stomach ache, and dizziness, but I've started creating templates for nearly everything. And I think simply because my assessment, I want it to be robust, I want it to be consistent, and I want it to be clear. So I have templates that I've started building for menstrual cramps, for a sore throat, for cold and flu symptoms. Just things like that. I know that the other nurse I work with made one for losing a baby tooth. So I think it just really just depends, like, what are these common things that you're seeing, and how do you want to make sure your charting is robust and also super easy. because oftentimes, like, some of these things can be so straightforward. So the next chief complaint we can walk through is a stomach ache. Again, I'm in this guiding my assessment. I'm looking at onset. I'm also looking at what's this pain score. How can I gather what degree of pain they're in? The other part too, let me immediately figure out, like, if I'm asking them to point to what part of their stomach they're having pain in, I also want to get an idea. Am I charting that they pointed to which part of their stomach? I also want to be really clear that they are not having any localized pain in their right lower quadrant. That's where I'm looking at these red flags for something like appendicitis, of like, how can I differentiate that today is a stomach ache where they just don't feel well for XYZ reason versus this is a precursor for them needing to go to the ER. So that's kind of where I'm doing my build-ins of like, okay, in asking for their pain score, I also said, where is it? And I'm documenting where is it. This describes as, I think, is really important. It goes back to saying that the chief complaint is put in the student's own words, but this is also where I want to get an idea of, what are they experiencing that I'm maybe missing, and I want to write down. Emesis episodes, another really helpful part is, have they vomited? And then also the big part is, did I observe it personally or was it something they reported to me? I think those differentiations are also really helpful. In general, I also have this pre-built like temperature, degrees in Celsius, afebrile, because most of the time the student is going to be afebrile. You could also change that to say afebrile or whatever it is that you want it to say. Again, last meal if volunteered and fluid intake. Those are going to always impact our students. So those are my fill in the blanks for my stomach ache assessment. And then make my critical thinking visible and catch my red flags. Like I said, my main red flag is going to be appendicitis, and I want to make sure that their appendix is not about to burst. And so these are things that you're studying for in your NCSN that you're also like, okay, obviously they don't have appendicitis, but at the same time, my charting needs to reflect why I ruled out something severe. The other thing too is they're ambulating upright without guarding. I think that without guarding, like if they're guarding, maybe there's a pain that they're not telling me about. And also maybe this could be a precursor for something more serious. If they are not vomiting, I want to make it clear that they told me they are not vomiting and they do not have diarrhea. And so that way it's also very evident of, I assessed those things and I made sure that they weren't happening. But sometimes I think I ask those questions and then really quickly move on and don't write them. But I also want to say, like, no, I did assess for those things. Again, accepted and declined interventions. Then this last part, again, improving our evaluation part of the nursing process, are closing the loop. So reports improvement, you'll see this is the same sentence as the one before in the headache template. And then when to come back to me, or when to escalate care. If pain worsens, if they start vomiting, or if they're starting to feel hot, or just like body aches, chills, anything. We're providing these instructions to kids if they are leaving our office for the most part. And again, too, I think it can also change. Are you frequently sending kids home for a stomach ache? Then change what you want your template to look like. So really, let's see, if I have a kid coming in for a stomach ache, I'm asking all these questions. Here's my template to be like, ask X, Y, and Z. And then I can also really quickly chart. And I am able to do this charting portion in less than a few minutes, because ultimately I'm filling in the blanks. I may be adding some things that are a little bit more relevant to this student and their situation. But right off the bat, I have something already built that's like, here it is. It has everything. It's clear. It's looking at what I saw, what I considered, what I decided, and it's looking at what I did and what happened after. I think it's all of these different components where I just want to make sure my note reflects those. And then I'll do a third example. And I think ultimately the best part is you can start making these customized to however you want them to be. So my third example is going to be dizziness and lightheadedness. So I'm looking, obviously, sometimes dizziness and lightheadedness can be pretty concerning. And I also want to make sure I'm noticing any red flag things. I want to make sure that I'm asking all of the right questions and being really robust in my charting. So especially if this is something that's happening consistently, I want to know what's preceding this event. What do they remember? Did they lose consciousness? what was the feeling like? Did they feel woozy? Did they feel an aura? Like, what are these things that are impacting them? And then also, how long has it lasted? Have they been just feeling a little bit dizzy and able to move around since yesterday, or was it something where it felt more severe and happened really suddenly? Part of this too, ultimately, when we're assessing for dizziness or lightheadedness, sometimes is when the kid has already fainted. And so this is also if I'm getting to this precursor of feeling faint, but then you can also explicitly write, has the student experienced an episode of syncope? And so you can look at that. This triggers or patterns noted. This is really where I want to be able to go back in my notes of, this has happened X amount of times. I'm going to reach out to parent or guardian and say, here's what I'm noticing every time. And here is where we can start building something, whether that's like a case for, hey, go to a healthcare provider and get assessed because we're noticing this consistently, or these are all over the place and this is how they're experiencing these physical manifestations. But really, I'm using this to be able to support where I can go with this next. Again, for dizziness, lightheadedness, I'm denying recent head injury, chest pain, or difficulty breathing, especially when I'm looking at their dizziness and lightheadedness. I'm concerned about their cardiac function, so I may also be looking at different vital signs. But I also, especially if I'm going to send them out of my office, I need to be sure that their appearance and gait are within normal limits. They seem to be acute and oriented ×3, no acute distress. This is also what I typically see and what I typically want to chart. And so this is what my template looks like, and you can truly customize it for whatever you look like. I think that to me too, a prompt like this, appearance and gait within normal limits, if that isn't true, it's another reminder for me to delete that and go change it to this different assessment that is maybe abnormal. But these are just kind of my fill in the blanks. Again, accepted or declined interventions. What did they offer? What did I offer and what did they choose to accept? The last part, closing the loop, again, really similar to the other ones. Reports improvement, this pain score, or no change, and then instructed to return if symptoms recur, if they worsen, if they really do have a whole fainting episode, if they're experiencing chest pain, or if they have difficulty breathing. This makes it really clear that instead of just saying, okay, come back to me, how can I get you here before something really terrible happens? Obviously not trying to disaster plan and everything, but I want my charting to be really clear of as nurses, we are assessing all of these things. And sometimes I just don't write it down every time. And I just want to make sure that my nursing process is reflected in every clinical note. One, because I think that it it helps me feel more clinical sometimes too when I'm like, I'm not working in an ICU anymore, nor does the school nursing office need to be treated like an ICU. But how am I looking at everything critically? And how do I make sure my note says that I assessed things critically? So these are a few of my examples. Like I talked about, we can make it for all different kinds of examples, especially depending on what you have. And this is also from the nursing lens. I think that you could do this from the other nurse I work with. We've been working on templates for our front office staff to be able to chart. This is also really it's really important because I want to make sure they are never put in a position as an unlicensed school personnel to be making an assessment or doing any clinical assessment. And so I want to make sure they have enough guidance to be able to ask the right questions of the student without being in a position to be a clinical decision maker. But then also, let's say my front office staff assessed that student last time and I'm assessing them this time. How can I go into their notes and see enough information for me to understand what happened last time and influence my care this time? So we were building some of those for our front office staff just to kind of see, how can I make sure that your charting helps me and maybe my charting will help you. But then how can I build these prompts for them too when, they don't have the same resources and degree that we have. And so I want to make this process as easy as possible for them when they're already doing 8 million things. So I I have had so much fun playing around with templates and being able to really make sure my charting is telling this story. So now when I'm thinking about charting, I'm making sure I don't rely on my memory. I'm not skipping steps when I'm busy. This is also really important too. Sometimes I'm brushing through things and I'm like, nope, this is my list of like, oh, I need to ask this and I need to ask this. The other thing is my charting stays consistent. I think that a presentation of like a headache in one student could look entirely different in another student. And so I can make sure to write in those nuances. But for all of these other portions, like, yes, consistently every time I am assessing this more in-depth neurologic status if that's what's needed. And I'm not excluding that just because I had deemed that one to be a little bit more basic and straightforward than the next one. And then really my thinking is visible. I think I almost call it like giving myself credit, but you do give yourself credit for the work that you're doing, the questions that you're asking, all of these different things that you're running through. And if anything, I like being able to give myself credit in my notes for being able to go and do that in depth. So I really love how the charting I'm changing now is going to better reflect the nursing process and better reflect best practice. A lot of what I learned from studying is in this national certified school nurse is what the standards of care are. And I also want to make sure that my charting is reflecting these standards of care. And then I also will have consistent and defensible documentation. I want to make sure I can read my documentation and know what was I thinking in that moment, and did I give myself enough information if I need to go look at this a year from now and reflect on it? Did I assess the full picture? So, and this is really where strong charting and best practice isn't just like documenting everything, especially when we're not doing documenting by exception. I think it's like, no, we don't need to document every single focused system. And we don't need to document, like, no, their heart was normal when also their heart may have nothing to do with what we're looking at. But it is really about showing your clinical judgment and showing your assessment, showing that you are aware of what these red flags are and that this student didn't qualify for those red flags. And so I have had a lot of fun using August just to make my charting even more visible and make sure that my best practice is reflected in my charting. So building templates has been the most helpful. I love August for that reason and just making that quick every single time. And thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Yeah, so we are going to move on to, as Joy said, a Q&A section. So if you have any questions, please feel free to place those in the chat or under the Q&A tab in the chat. And I just need to say a huge thank you to Joy. I think you very clearly showed us your specific workflow, how that's been kind of like adapted through your learnings and how you've been able to leverage August to use that, particularly through like building those templates that you've done. And I just wanted to see if there's anyone that, if you thought of a specific workflow that you're doing that you'd like to have reflected in August, please reach out to us and we can talk through your specific situation. So I'll post the specific email that you can reach us at. But yeah, if there's any questions, please post those in the chat.
I will also add, while people are writing down any questions, I'm happy to share some resources about what the certified school nurse exam is about, what resources I used to prepare for it. And even then, one of my favorite resources was the certification review book. There's also a textbook that you can go through. I think that was a little bit too dense for my learning style, but the certification review book has so many practice questions in it. I loved the flow of it, and I loved the way that it made me think clinically different and think about my evaluation process. The other part I loved about studying was really, what does my practice look like right now? And when I'm reading something where I'm like, oh, we should totally do that, I'm also making notes for myself of what do I want what do I want to take from this learning and continue to implement into my practice? So when the webinar gets sent out, I'll make sure those resources are sent too.
Okay, well, please excuse the loud barking for my 3 dogs. But if any questions come up afterwards, please feel free to email us. And I think that's it for now. All right. Thank you, everyone, for your time. Thank you, Joy.
Thank you so much.